be a little bit different. I have Alex Newman, who's just getting back from the United Nations meeting there at the headquarters. And we're going to be going through some very deep things about deep states, elites, billionaires from Davos that want to control humans and at the same time destroy or fundamentally alter the United States. Alex, thank you so much for joining me again.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
So some background on Alex. He is a journalist, author, educator, exposer of evil. He wrote a book called Deep State, The Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. He's also the founder of Liberty Sentinel, which is an incredible newsletter that I recommend you guys look into. I wanted to talk about some things from the Kamala Harris Fox News interview. I have a feeling it was her first and last time. She got roasted pretty hard. She came across as bitter and angry and very flustered. So I want to just go through a couple of things. Bret Baier pointed out that she has repeatedly said that the border is safe and secure, but during the interview, she said it's not secure and it hasn't been for a long time. Then Bret Baier pointed out, but yes, it's gotten worse under you. All the data shows that. And then she tried to blame Donald Trump. Why do you think Kamala Harris would be shifting away from this idea that the border is safe and then trying to lump Trump in with her damaging policies?
I really think, Stephen, she has no other option. I mean, if she tells the truth, hey, me and Joe Biden were responsible for this thing. We had the most secure border that we have had in generations. And in a period of just a few short years, we completely blew that all up and brought in who knows how many millions of illegal immigrants. I mean, they literally have the Border Patrol down there processing illegal immigrants and releasing them into the country as quickly as they can. If she admits that, everybody, including most of the Democrats, are going to be upset by that. I mean, you talk to an average, normal Democrat, you go into an inner city and talk to people about what they think about this illegal immigration. Everybody understands this is out of control. You've got the crime explosion. You've got the driving down of wages. And so Kamala Harris really only has a few options for how to deal with this. And telling the truth is certainly not an option. You look like a destroyer of everything good. You burn up your voter base. So the only option left is try to blame Donald Trump. So I can't say I blame her for doing that, but you do have to wonder, how dumb does she really think Americans are? I mean, does she really think people are going to believe that? And I suspect that Americans are smart enough to know that that is simply not the case.
Yeah. Well, the Border Patrol has now fully endorsed Donald Trump, saying that he is the only person that can fix the border. In fact, the head of the Border Patrol said, a bunch of us are going to quit if Kamala wins because we're not putting up with this bull stuff for another 4 years. I don't know that I would either. Their suicide rates are out of control. I mean, how demoralizing would it be that your job is to defend the border of the United States, and instead, all day long, all you do is let people break the law and come into the country and bankrupt our welfare programs, get better benefits than veterans and seniors. I mean, I have to imagine they are very demoralized on the border.
Oh, they are very demoralized. These are people who signed up because they wanted to protect their country. They wanted to protect the border. They wanted to protect their fellow Americans from human trafficking, from drug smuggling, from illegal immigration, from terrorism and enemy operatives coming across our border. And now they're being ordered to facilitate all of those things. It is unconscionable what they've done to these guys, and nobody, I think, can blame them for wanting to quit their jobs if this is going to continue. It is so bad. It's at the point now where these guys, I think, struggle to get up in the morning and go to work. If you try to talk to them, even all the way up to the highest levels, I've talked to Mark Morgan, Tom Homan, some of the top officials in border protection during the previous administration. They'll tell you, and all the rank and file on the ground, they know that this is a deliberate policy to hurt the United States. They know that they're releasing. I mean, Congress has released reports on this. They know that a lot of the Communist Chinese operatives that are coming across the border are members of the People's Liberation Army. How would you feel if you were ordered to knowingly participate in allowing hostile, highly trained enemy forces, special operators in many cases, come across the border knowing full well that they intend to do harm to your fellow citizens who you are hoping to protect by getting up in the morning and going to your job. It is, I would argue, a crime being perpetrated not just against America, but specifically against the men and women of the Border Patrol. It's absolutely unconscionable.
Yeah. It would be like suddenly telling doctors your first directive is first do harm instead of first do no harm. Like your job is to do harm to the country that you love and signed up. As a quick note, President Trump has announced that he will hire 10,000 new border agents. He will get them a 10% raise and a $10,000 signing bonus. So right away from day one, he's going to reverse the 90 executive orders that Biden and Harris did to weaken the border and weaken the United States of America. Another thing that happened during this interview is Brett Baer pointed out that over 70% of America believes that we are heading in the wrong direction. He then said, "You've been the leader of America for 3.5 years." And Kamala responded, "Yeah, but Trump is running for president too." Like, what? This woman, she has no thoughts in her head. And you can tell she was regurgitating talking points. It was just such an embarrassment. I mean, like, did he completely catch her off guard? Why on earth would she be like, he's bad too?
I think this is exactly why, Stephen, they had to sneak her in by removing Joe Biden at the last minute. If they had had an honest primary, if they had said, well, Joe Biden's not going to run again, so let's have a real primary. Let's let the voters choose who is going to be the Democrat nominee. They know Kamala Harris would not have been selected. They know because they saw her numbers in 2020. She was in the single digits in her own home state of California. She is about as unpopular, about as unlikable as any person you will ever find. And so what else do you do if you're in a situation like that? You have to blame Donald Trump. You don't have anything reasonable to say. You clearly don't have any good policy ideas that the American people will support. So you have to say goofy stuff like that and just rely on the media to try to put lipstick on a pig, as the old saying goes, and rely on the fake media to try to market you to voters. And then hopefully, if they can get their way, rely on various shenanigans and manipulations. And we're seeing a lot of that now coming into the light to be able to win the election. So there's so much here that needs to be exposed, so much here that needs to be talked about. And I think after this election is done, we've got to have a postmortem and figure out how did we get to a point in our country where elitists could select a person like Kamala Harris, who's got a radical Marxist background. I mean, literally a red diaper baby coming from two communist parents, who has a long and well-documented track record of associations with Maoists and communists and radicals, extremists who want to destroy this country. How did the elitists who run not just the Democrat Party, but many other institutions select this person to be their standard bearer? And once you answer that question, you're going to answer a whole lot of other questions that the American people need to be thinking about. Yeah.
The only thing that gives me comfort if she does win is that at least she's from the middle class. And at least then she can understand, my plight and problems. Help me and my audience understand this. These billionaires and world leaders, the elites, the World Economic Forum, they get together a couple of times a year and they literally try to circumvent governments to control the world population. Why does the World Economic Forum and the elites in Brussels want Europeans and Americans to give up eating beef and instead be eating bugs? It makes no sense to me.
Well, I think they want to transform every aspect of life. They actually want to smash Western civilization. They want to smash what used to be known as Christendom, the free world. And that requires a dismantling of the systems that have maintained it, the systems that have produced it. And the independent farmer, the independent rancher who's able to feed not just himself and his family, but his community and the fellow citizens of his country is a giant obstacle to that, right? Think of what is the ultimate symbol of American independence? What is the ultimate symbol of, manliness and self-reliance and rugged individualism? It's the American cowboy, right? And so you neutralize that, and you get people eating. You got CNN telling people they need to drink cockroach milk. This is a story that when I first reported it, I got a copy from a source within the UN, the Food and Agriculture Organization, of this incredible plan, 2013. So this is more than a decade ago, saying, hey, we've got to get people to eat bugs because that's going to be sustainable. We've got to stop the eating of meat. We've got to stop the eating of cows in particular. We've got to get them eating bugs as a source of protein. And then they outlined the mechanisms for how they would do that. You're going to market it through the public school system. You're going to market it through the tax-funded media. So you got NPR, BBC, these kinds of things promoting it. And then the end question, why? Well, I believe it's about a tyrannical agenda. First of all, if you control the food supply, you control the population. Independent farmers, independent ranchers are not compatible with a centralized food system because they can produce food and they can sell it to their neighbors. I mean, I myself, I buy meat from my local farmers and ranchers. We buy cheese, we buy milk, we buy eggs from local farmers and ranchers. If they can destroy that industry by taxing it to death under the guise of emissions, by regulating it to death under the guise of endangered species or navigable waters of the United States, or pick your regulatory policy, they can then cut that off as an option and force me back into the system. Then I got to go to Walmart. I got to go to my local grocery store chain to be able to get my food. And insects are a very easy to centralize industry. In fact, we see right now they're building some of the largest insect protein processing facilities in the world in Illinois, just up north on the other side of the border in Canada. They're already feeding European school children, Australian school children, insect protein in their diets. Now, they know this is terrible for them. The government's got studies right in the NIH archive of peer-reviewed studies showing that eating insects can be extremely dangerous. The chitin in their exoskeletons causes cancer, lupus, all kinds of terrible things. These insects are infected with parasites that are disastrous for mammals. And so they know all this. So I think the real goal is to destroy liberty. And if you go back, they talk a lot about sustainable development. I mean, that is officially the pretext for why we all need to eat bugs and stop eating cows. And you go back to the earliest meeting on sustainable development that was held by the United Nations. It was early 1970s in Vancouver, the UN Habitat 1 Summit. And they actually enshrined in their final document, the Vancouver Declaration, this is a UN declaration with support from the governments of the world, their view of where sustainable development needed to go. And they actually said in very, very clear language that we have got to get rid of private land ownership. And if you think about it, almost all wealth is ultimately produced from the land, right? Whether that be the minerals, whether it be the energy, whether it be the wood, the construction materials, the metal that goes into making all the goods and services that we need. The ownership of the land is absolutely essential. It's one of the reasons why communists, going all the way back to Karl Marx, have been so obsessed with having government control of the land. So you go back and you read the Vancouver 1 Declaration, where they outlined their early vision for sustainable development. And what you find is right there in plain text, I can actually probably pull it up here real quick, a call for ending private land ownership and moving us toward government control of all land use. Let's see if I can find that. I got it right here. So here's the text from this document, 1976. It's called Human Settlement Issues 1, Habitat and Land, the Vancouver Declaration for short. It says, land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals. Private land ownership is a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice. Public control of land use is therefore indispensable. So ultimately, why do they want to get rid of beef? Why do they want to get rid of private agriculture? Because it involves private land use, and private property is the foundation of individual liberty.
Have you ever wondered what happened to legendary Chuck Norris? I recently saw a video he made and I was shocked. He's in his 80s and still kicking butt, working out and staying active. What's even more shocking is he's stronger, can work out longer, and even has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He did this by making one change. He says he feels like he's in his 50s. His wife even started doing what he's doing, and she says she feels better. She says she feels 10 years younger. Her body looks leaner and she has energy all day. Chuck made a special video that explains everything. Make sure you watch it by going to chuckdefense.com/SG, or click the link below this video. It will change the way you think about your health. Once again, that's chuckdefense.com/SG. Click the link in the video description to watch the video. You won't believe how simple it is. Just a reminder, the legendary Chuck Norris is a whopping 84 years old, yet has more energy than me. He discovered he could create dramatic changes in his health, simply focusing on 3 things that sabotage your body as we age. Watch this method by clicking the link in the video description box down below, chuckdefense.com/SG. And social injustice, right?
Right.
That one person should have land. I mean, that directly goes against the American dream, right? To have a plot of land and a house with a roof over your head, the ability to grow a garden. I see all this negative stuff about Bill Gates, that he's a eugenist. He wants to lower the population. So now he's focusing on vaccines heavily. He's focusing on interfering with new medical innovation. He wants to spray aerosol into the air and block out the sun. We know vitamin D is essential for the human body, testosterone production, healing, mood, all of that. And then now bugs and different things. He wants to stop cows from farting. I mean, this is insane stuff. Is it the fact that, and I know there's atheists that watch me, so I'm not trying to be insulting to anybody's religious or non-religious beliefs, but I have to imagine that a lot of these elites are godless people that believe that there are finite resources and those should go to them and their families versus the general population, which they believe is out of control.
Yeah, there's no question about it. A lot of these elitists believe exactly what you just described. And in fact, I've run into some of them and talked to them about this. I ran into Ted Turner in Rio de Janeiro in 2012 at the Rio Plus 20 Summit and asked him about this very issue. Why are you so obsessed with reducing the number of people on the planet? And they're very open about this. They do believe, as you said, that there's finite resources. Of course, this actually comes from a very flawed understanding of economics, right? You don't need to ration resources or reduce the population. Market mechanisms will, in very, very efficient ways, allocate production, allocate resource distribution in a way that is unbelievably efficient, that is unbelievably good. And when you start running out of a resource, if you do, the price goes up. And so then investment pours into alternatives. And very soon you got something else. Like back in the day, they used to say, we're going to run out of whales because we're using whales to light our lamps. Well, we didn't run out of whales, right? We just moved over to kerosene and we could all light our lanterns without having to worry about an end to whale populations. So this is true on everything. If you go back and look at the predictions of, for example, Thomas Malthus, who said we were going to run out of land and food because the population was growing so quickly, he could not have been more wrong. And he's, of course, the father of Malthusianism, this idea that we're going to run out of resources. He could not have been more wrong. All these kooks and quacks who've been arguing that we're going to run out of oil, we've got more proven accessible oil reserves today than we have ever had in all of human history. We're not in any danger of running out of oil. So they had to come up with a new scam now. That is the CO2 scam. CO2 is pollution. That's how we're going to limit energy, because the old we're going to run out of oil thing didn't pan out. But what they want, I think some of them, and at the lower levels, yes, people believe the lie that we'll run out of resources and that the government needs to step in and save us. But when you get to a higher level, I think it's even more diabolical than that. They want control over their fellow human beings. They want to run the lives of their fellow human beings. They hate their fellow human beings. If you look at it in biblical terms, the Bible says people are made in the image of God. And so, of course, people who hate God would also hate people who are made in the image of God. And I think normal people struggle to understand this, Stephen, because normal people don't think like this. Normal people just want to feed their family. Normal people just want to have a little bit of entertainment and a little bit of fun after they're done working. But you have in every society, throughout all of human history, a segment of the population. And we could debate how big it is. Is it 2%? Is it 5%? It really doesn't matter. There's a segment in every population, and we'd be very naive to think America is immune from this, that is made up of megalomaniacs, psychopaths, evildoers who are not just interested in feeding their family. They're not just interested in doing their job and having a little bit of relaxation. They're interested in running your life for you. And if you get in the way of that, they're interested in killing you. right? And you don't have to think too hard about this to realize that that's true. Look back at human history. Look around the world today. Everywhere you look, you've got mass murdering dictators. You got Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, Pol Pot, Fidel Castro. We could list names all day long. And what is going on here? And are we foolish enough to believe that America doesn't have any people like that? So when you have people like that who are obsessed with these things, who spend all day, every day plotting on how can I take control over my fellow human beings? How can I get rid of anybody who stands in my way? It's very hard to resist that. Obviously, they tend to be attracted to institutions that already have power and money. So generally speaking, in a society like ours, they'll flow toward the government. And then they're ruthless. They're not bound by moral and ethical codes like the rest of us. We believe we shouldn't lie, we shouldn't steal, we shouldn't cheat. They're not bound by those kinds of things. So they rise up through the ranks. They end up in charge of these mechanisms. And pretty soon they're unleashing hell on earth. This happens all over the world, all the time, all throughout human history. We in America were very blessed to have founding fathers who set up a system that was able to limit that was able to control that through checks and balances, vertically, horizontally, etc. But those foundations now are starting to crack, and we will end up just like every other people group in history if we allow that to happen.
Okay. You mentioned to me off camera that you were just returning from the United Nations headquarters where they were having a meeting. What were some of the things that you learned or talking points or events that stuck out to you?
So yeah, I was at the Summit of the Future. This is one of the most important UN meetings that has taken place in a very long time. They prepared for years in advance to do this. You had hundreds of kings, presidents, prime ministers, potentates. Joe Biden even showed up, but almost nothing about it in the media. That was fascinating. And I think that was by design. They didn't want people knowing about this. But they came up with a final outcome document. They call it the Pact for the Future. And I would encourage people to read this document. It argues for the creation of what they're calling UN 2.0. So when the UN was set up, at least on paper, it was just about peace and making sure nations don't go to war with each other anymore. At least that's what they told us. Now, they've obviously utterly failed in that. We've been warring with each other for 80 years. So now they've decided, well, now we need to control education and the environment and the economy and the internet and the cyberspace and artificial intelligence and you name it. And I encourage people to read this document. It calls for strengthening global governance. It calls in action item 54 for putting the UN Secretary General in charge of the response to what they call global emergencies. And to understand a lot of these things, you need to go back to the preparation. So I first exposed the emergencies component of this in early 2023. I did an article for the Epoch Times because the Secretary General had released a policy brief on this very issue. And in so many words, they said that, we're in a complex system now. We've got global shocks that are a threat to humanity, and there could be global emergencies. It could be climate, it could be health, it could be pandemic, it could be cyber attack, it could be environmental, it could be economic, it could be a black swan event, it could be even a non-global emergency. And so we need the Secretary General to be able to declare an emergency at his sole prerogative and then become essentially the global dictator. And they say in there that all nation states, businesses, everybody would have to defer to the primary decision-making authority of the multilateral agencies like the UN, like its specialized agencies. So that made it into the final component. It calls for global censorship, for shutting down misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, hate speech, you name it. And so I ran into the Undersecretary General of Communications of the UN. Her name is Melissa Fleming, and asked her about this. She had announced in 2022 a partnership with Google to promote UN information and shut down all the rest of us. And so I said, what's the formula you use? Can the people of the world who pay your salary know how you and Google decide what people should be allowed to see, what they should be allowed to read? And she gets really cold and clammy and said, who are you? I don't recognize you. I can't talk to you. She runs away and her staffers come in. We put the videos out. People could see it. And her staffers say, oh, no, sorry, she doesn't have any time to talk to you. We got it on camera, as she's talking to other reporters right behind me. So they don't want to talk about these things, but you read this agreement, they call for the creation of information integrity, which means essentially purging all voices that don't go along with the narrative. Dozens of references to education. The UN now wants to control education. They say every child has a right to a equitable, safe, inclusive, and high quality education, which sounds nice on paper until you realize it's going to be the UN that will define what is a quality education. And trust me, it's not going to line up with your view on what a quality education is. So just on every front, Stephen, it's an incredibly dangerous agreement. I've spoken to some of the top experts in international law in the world. Very concerned about this. I reached out to Congressman Mike McCall, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He is very concerned about this. So it's a huge power grab, a power grab of historic proportions. And I asked the spokesman for the UN Secretary General, the socialist Antonio Guterres, about the concerns that American policymakers were expressing. We had half of the nation's governors saying they're not going to obey UN mandates on public health just in the run up to this thing. And he said, we're not building a world government here. This isn't an attack on sovereignty. You should go read it. But by the way, we have all these world problems like global pandemics, global terrorism. And so how are we going to solve those if we don't do it through a coordinated global mechanism? So we're not building a world government, but we really need a world government. So that's always been the plan, Stephen, and they are making massive strides in that direction. The Communist Party of China was very pleased with this. And so I was there as an accredited reporter for the New American Magazine, and I've never seen the kind of control that we were subjected to there. Even in Egypt and third world dictatorships, we have not been subjected to the kind of controls that we faced by the UN at the headquarters this time. And people ought to be very concerned about this.
Okay. So would an example be during COVID, even though we had 50 state surgeon generals and the main one, and we had Dr. Fauci and the NIH and all of that, they still looked upstream to the WHO for how to respond to COVID. So that's what they're looking for is even the president of the United States would have to bow down to United Nations.
That's exactly what they're trying to do, Stephen. And they wouldn't put it in those terms, but take what happened during COVID, right? The whole world was looking to the WHO for policy on this. Even YouTube, right? Where people are probably watching us right now. The CEO of YouTube, Susan Wojcicki, rest in peace. She came out publicly and said on CNN, anything that contradicts World Health Organization recommendations is going to be removed from our platform. So even what the information you could access was being determined by an international bureaucracy, completely unelected, run by an actual former communist terrorist, an ethno-Marxist terror leader. He was on the Politburo of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, designated ethno-Marxist terrorist organization. How did it come to pass that an organization that none of us ever voted for, most people couldn't even find out where its headquarters is on a map, how did we end up all taking our guidance, our state, our local, our federal, all around the world, governments taking our policy advice from these people? Now apply that not just to public health, apply it to education, apply it to economy, apply it to the environment. And if you look at what the UN is doing, it comes out very, very clear in this document, and they've been working on it for a long time. They're actually building all of the architecture of a global government. They call it global governance. It's just a nice way of saying global government. But, we have an EPA. They've got the UN Environment Program. We have a Department of Health and Human Services. They've got a World Health Organization. We've got police agencies. They have UN cops. They have UN police. We've got the Department of Defense. They have the Department of Peacekeeping, which is the Department of War Making, military forces. We've got courts, actually right in the Pact of the Future. It says all nations must submit to the binding authority of the International Court of Justice, right? So they've got a court system. They've got all of the architecture of a government. They call for global tax cooperation. So they're moving at lightning speed toward the creation of a single global political system, a single global economic system, and maybe even more probably a single world religious system. And they're doing it at this point all in the open, Stephen.
Wow. Okay. I knew you would have the information that my community would need. We've got to push back on this garbage. One thing I wanted, you mentioned, using CO2 to control people. I saw something that you put out. It says award-winning journalist Alex Newman perfectly summarizes the climate scam. Let me just read what you said. The notion that CO2 is pollution is absolutely preposterous. The idea that it's going to destroy the planet or change the temperature of the earth is totally ludicrous. From a totalitarian perspective, if you can convince people that CO2 is pollution, there's no human activity that doesn't result in CO2 emission, including living, including dying, turning on a light switch. So I hear about this as I read about European news, that they literally want these like carbon taxes. They want to shame people for breathing, eating animals. So is this what you're talking about when you say that they're trying to create CO2 into a pollution so that they can control us?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Stephen. And it's not that they're trying to do that. It's that they have officially done that, including in the United States. The EPA has declared that carbon dioxide is pollution. And so under the Clean Air Act, they have now usurped for themselves the authority to regulate any major source of CO2, including power plants. So people need to understand, first of all, a few things about CO2. Carbon dioxide is literally the gas of life. You exhale about 2 pounds of it every single day of your life, and then trees use that for photosynthesis. They release the oxygen back into the environment, and the carbon atom they incorporate into the plant material. So this is part of the natural cycle of the planet. In fact, as Donald Trump's climate advisor, Dr. William Happer from Princeton University, explained to me on camera, the world is facing a shortage of CO2. In fact, we have drastically less CO2 than we have had historically. Right now, we've got less than 400 parts per million. Historically, we've had over 1,000 parts per million. Plants, he told me, were designed, and it was an interesting word for a Princeton physics professor to use, but he said plants were designed to live in an atmosphere with 4 to 5 times as much CO2 in it as we have today, which is why, of course, farmers dump CO2 into their greenhouse. If anything, we're facing a shortage of CO2. And so, and also to put the human contribution of this into perspective, I think people don't really have a sense of this because they hear Al Gore say, oh, we're dumping tons of carbon pollution into the atmosphere. Let's put those numbers into perspective, okay? The human contribution of greenhouse gases in the environment from all of our power plants and our SUVs and our airplanes and everything else we do is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%, okay? It's not even a drop in the ocean. And we're supposed to believe that that little teeny piece, right, which a couple of volcanoes could blow up, it could make all human contributions disappear overnight by perspective, by comparison. To believe that that is going to cause global warming, catastrophic climate crisis is so utterly ludicrous that you would have to dumb down the population beforehand to make them believe something so silly. Now, Americans, I give them a lot of credit. The polling data, even the AP New York Center for Public Affairs Research found that less than half of Americans even believe that human emissions of CO2 are causing climate change. So Americans get it. Our policymakers either don't or pretend not to. But I want to prove, just really briefly, Stephen, if I may, that even the people promoting in this at the highest levels do not believe it themselves. And I believe it's very easy to prove this. I first wrote a detailed explanation of this a few years ago, grabbed all the numbers. And it first occurred to me when I was in Paris at the UN Climate Summit. So Barack Obama was strutting around like some sort of, Captain Planet saving the world from CO2. And he's bragging about how we're going to slash American CO2 emissions by 30% over the next few years. And so this is going to be great. We're going to save the world. And then the Communist Chinese came, because every government was supposed to announce its own contributions to this thing. The Communist Chinese came out and said, yes, we're going to keep increasing our CO2 emissions until maybe like 2030, maybe longer. And of course they did. They made good on that promise. And now think about this for a moment. Let's just assume CO2 is bad. It's not, but let's just assume for the sake of argument, CO2 is really bad. Barack Obama comes back to the United States. He doesn't present this to the U.S. Senate for ratification. Instead, he treats it as an executive agreement, which is not a thing, and starts implementing it via executive edict, executive orders, regulatory changes, et cetera. He starts shutting down power plants, shutting down oil exploration. What does that do? It causes a dramatic surge in energy prices. So if you're a manufacturer in Michigan, if you're manufacturing something in Wisconsin, and a big part of your input is electricity prices, what's going to happen when your electricity prices soar? Which, by the way, Barack Obama said was deliberate policy. He said, under my plan, electricity prices will skyrocket. And he made good on that promise. Well, your factory is not going to be competitive against a factory in China. So it's going to shut down. It's going to be relocated to Shanghai or to Beijing or to whatever, some place in China. And then what's going to happen? Well, the Communist Chinese are building 2 coal-fired power plants every single week, 52 weeks out of the year. And they've been doing it for years. Their CO2 emissions now are 300% of what the United States emissions are, and their CO2 emissions per unit of economic production are massively higher than what that same unit of economic production would have resulted in Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota or any other manufacturing state. So what do you make of this? If you believe CO2 is bad, this is the worst possible thing you could do for the planet, is shut down energy in America, shut down production in America, and ship it to communist China. And yet that's exactly what they did. And they're slapping each other high fives and patting each other on the back. So I believe using just those facts, you can prove definitively that the people pushing this hoax do not believe it themselves.
Wow. Well, the thing that always stands out to me is the billionaires that tell us not to fly and not to drive are the same people with beachfront property that are complaining that the ocean is going to rise so much that Florida will disappear, California will fall into the ocean, all of the crazy. Like, I'm trying to think of like a good analogy. You know, you mentioned 300% more carbon production. It's like, let's say that every day China was throwing 300 straws into the ocean and America was throwing one in, and America's like, we have to cut this straw in half. Right? Like, we're killing the planet. Meanwhile, China's like, no, we're actually going to go to 400 straws every day into the, like, that's what this is. You know, they're like putting all this pressure on the American people and scaring them. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is just doing whatever they want.
Of course, Stephen. And I was on the Arabian Peninsula just, I guess, 9 months ago now for the latest climate summit. And this was so obvious to everybody that was there. You had the Arabs and the Chicoms making oil deals. You had the Arabs and the communists in Latin America and Africa making oil deals as they're all promising on paper they're going to phase out hydrocarbon fuels. It's only the morons in the West that are going to be subjected to the phasing out of hydrocarbon fuels. The communist Chinese, the Russians, the South Africans, the Brazilians, they're all going to keep doing it. So they've been talking about this for a long time, the emergence of a multipolar world order. How do you bring that about when America is so rich and so prosperous and so free? We have to cut it off at the knees. And how better to do that than undermine the energy production and the energy consumption that makes prosperity possible, that liberates us from backbreaking labor. And I mean, the cruelty involved here is off the charts. But people need to understand they are being scammed in one of the most spectacular frauds that humanity has ever been subjected to. And Stephen, I've asked multiple U.S. senators about this, who voted for all this silly stuff. How do you justify this? Like, even if you believe this stuff, how do you justify this when you know the communist Chinese are just going to pick up all the slack? Oh, well, yeah, that's a good point. You know, the communist Chinese should also shoot themselves in the foot. I mean, really? Does anybody believe that's going to happen? So I think what we're seeing here is a deliberate betrayal of the American people by our own leaders for the purpose of bringing about a shift in the global geopolitical order from what they call the unipolar world order, with America as the unchallengeable hegemonic economic, military, and political power, toward a more multipolar world order where the communist Chinese model will suddenly look much more attractive and will hold much more sway over this architecture of global governance that we've been talking about.
Wow. Okay, well, we gotta push back on this, but getting educated is the first part. I want to have you back on and go a little bit deeper on the climate stuff, because all these, like, I've been researching about the free energy that's been hidden from us and ways to make things more efficient, and how these trillion-dollar industries hide it, bury it, kill for it. But like you say, like, they go to the climate summit to make oil deals, and we go there to promise that we'll stop buying stuff and living life and enjoying. So, Alex, I appreciate you coming on. If people want to follow you online, where can I send some traffic?
Well, thank you, Stephen. So my personal website is libertysentinel.org. And people always misspell Sentinel. It's SENTINEL.org. Or some of the future content is up at thenewamerican.com, or it's in the print magazine. But you can sign up for my newsletter for free at libertysentinel.org, and we put all the good stuff right there.
Okay. I will make sure to put a direct link to that so that people can find that. I appreciate you coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me, sir. God bless you.